Hey guys, it's Charles Miller again here at Fox Music House, and right now we're here at the Gilliard Center, and I'm here with the living jazz legend, Mr. Chick Corea. It's going to be
How you
performing
doing, man?
tonight. How you
Yeah,
doing, Mr. Corea?
pleasure.
We're glad to have you here in Charleston,
Yeah,
and thank you for taking the time with us to
yeah,
talk about music and just talk about kind of your journey, so to speak, with music, and the trio performance that you're going to actually be doing on tonight with Christian McBride and Brian Blade.
Brian Blade. Yeah.
Definitely, definitely. So we talked earlier a little bit off camera about Yamaha and how long you've been a Yamaha artist. Tell us,
Yeah, and
about
you
that.
you asked me how long you've been with them, and I said let's save that for the camera, because I didn't. You'd be surprised to know that my first contact with Yamaha Artist Services was back in 1967
Wow.
in Japan.
Okay.
And we were Nimono Sato was the name of the island, I believe, that we were doing a festival. And I played a piano solo, and Yamaha provided a concert grant for me at that
Wow.
time. And I made contact with the Yamaha folks, and ever since then we've stayed hooked up. And the thing about it was the service at Yamaha, to me anyway, was so great from the beginning that I considered that was the senior thing. Then as the decades went along, the R&D department of Yamaha just kept improving the concert grands. They kept improving the pianos, until the CFX came out, what, 8 years ago or
Yes.
something like that, and blew my mind. So, so that's been my favorite since.
Really, really. So, which Yamaha pianos have you mostly played before you played the CFX
Well,
that
I
you'll be
played
playing?
all the models.
Okay.
I've got a CF3S Disclavier
Okay.
in my studio,
Oh wow.
and then I've also got a CFX Disclavier in my workroom.
Okay.
And plus, in 1981, I actually bought a Bosendorfer Imperial.
Oh, the 290.
So I've got an Imperial and a CFX, the old Imperial and the new
Okay.
CFX sitting
Wow.
side by side. But when I record in my studio, I use the CFX.
Oh, fantastic. Now, you did mention Disclavier, and for those that don't know, the Disclavier is player piano technology. It's actually been around 30 years, created by Yamaha. Talk about how the Disclavier has kind of helped you in your recording process and in the musical creation process.
Well, at first, when the Disclavier first came, I didn't know what to do with it. It was just kind of a toy. It's like, wow, you can play in and then it'll play back. Great. And occasionally I would use it as a notebook, and I'd throw on the record button
Yeah.
and just play an idea down. But I never really utilized it. And more recently, I've been really utilizing it through MIDI, and being
Yeah.
able to take the digital performance,
Right.
and then go ahead inside Logic and edit it to my liking, and then send it back to the piano. And then the last way I used the Disclavier, which was really very, very helpful and productive, which was, well, this is for people who know about the recording process.
Right, exactly.
But when you record with drums or other instruments in the same room, and you're all close up together, and the piano is open, and
Right.
the microphones are on the piano, those piano microphones are going to pick up, especially the drums and whatever else is around it. So the piano recording isn't isolated, and it's harder to manipulate unless you get like a perfect balance with the music.
Which is difficult. Yeah.
So what I do now is I record every time I record with the CFX Disclavier. I also record the MIDI performance. So the MIDI digital performance gets put down, and I've got the really live contact with the drummer and the rest of the band, and we got a good take. And then I play the MIDI piano performance back to the CFX,
Right.
and just record it again. And the duplication that the unit does is so spot on that you really, really can't tell the difference between the actual live recording, the live play, and the digital rendition.
Definitely, as Yamaha has kind of put it, they actually kind of term that as time shifted performances. And the first time I heard that terminology, I said, well, what does that mean? And they really explained it. And I said, okay, that makes more sense. It's not just a playback, it's really a time shifted performance because it's actually every nuance is really being recreated
Yeah,
for the
yeah,
performer.
yeah. The only thing you don't have is the pianist sitting there,
Right.
and the keys are all going up and down, the pedals are moving, and
Oh, fantastic, fantastic. Well, let's talk about, your trio format. You've been known as, you started off first as a sideman, starting out in your career and in your solo career as well. But the trio format that you're doing now, how different is that as performing solo or some of the other um, ways that you've been performing throughout the years?
well, the trio. I don't know. I like the analogy sometimes to use that the trio is to to jazz and improvised music, bass, drums, and piano. What the string quartet is to classical music. It's a unit that has all of the elements of the music we love in it, with the drums and with the bass, both bowed and acoustic,
Right.
and the piano. So I grew up listening to that tradition, first of all the way back to the recordings my dad had when I was a kid with Bud Powell and
Bud Powell, yeah.
Thelonious Monk and
Yeah.
Duke Ellington. The rhythm section has been the basic unit for bands of all sizes. So that was what I grew up with and what I loved. So when I put a band together, uh, and it's more than just a trio, I always find the bass player and the drummer together that works well as a unit. Then add the other instruments. It's very essential to the music I make anyway. So when I go out with just a trio, it's sort of the essence, in a way, of the music that I love. Solo could be anything. Solo
Right.
piano. Solo is just solo could be anything from sitting in the living room at a Christmas party, to the church,
Right.
or to the recital hall and playing classical music or anything. But the trio is particular to jazz, so that's why I love to keep returning to that format.
Well, talk about this current project, Trilogy 2, that you've got out with Christian McBride on bass and Brian Blade on the drum set as well. And talk about, how this kind of formulated and your idea or the motif with this album.
Well, I have long histories with both Christian and Brian in different ways, and then we've come together and played in several different. Like, for instance, one project we did together more recently was we had a band. I had put a band together with John McLaughlin called the Five Piece Band,
Oh, yeah.
and it was with Kenny Garrett on saxophone, John playing guitar, Christian was playing bass. And the first part of the tour was with Vinnie Colaiuta, but then he couldn't make the second part of the tour, and I recommended that Brian come in because I had played with Brian and Christian before, and
Okay.
Brian killed it. It was a great band. I played with Brian and Christian together in various other configurations, but we started this particular trio in 2010.
Okay.
And we did a lot of touring through the years, and at one point put a three CD set out. It
Okay.
was our first Trilogy record that garnered 2 Grammys actually.
It's a fantastic project.
Then
Fantastic.
then there was lots of requests for more Trilogy music. So I took from the in order to fulfill that, I took from the recordings that we did in 2010, 2012, 2016, and compiled a second recording, which is now out.
Okay.
Trilogy 2.
Okay, so it's really kind of in the same vein of the original album.
The same vein would mean just the same three guys.
Oh, okay.
But the vein keeps changing.
Uh,
All kind of veins in there. the, the veins that make up the body are all over the different things that we do.
and I think that's one of the biggest things about you. You've never been stuck to one particular portion of jazz or just music in general. I guess through the decades, you've shifted in a lot of different from the electronica portions or the fusion, the early days of fusion jazz, to the avant-garde and what you're doing now with the trio work. And just talk about how you've been able to just kind of stay, inventive and creative with the music.
Well, that's a question for life, not just music. How do you stay creative? Inventive means to me, how do you stay alive?
Mm.
Because the less creativity and the less inventiveness that goes into your life, the less life you've got. That's the way I have it put together in my mind. So as soon as I found, at a young age, as soon as I found that I felt I was living life the best way that I could by making music, I recognized that, and I just kept pursuing that. I thought, well, that's the health of my life, and that's the pleasure of living, is to keep creating that way. So that's been, my personal policy for a lifetime.
That's fantastic. That's fantastic. And, we thank you again for joining us and just kind of talking
Yeah.
about music. You know, very rarely do we come across, folks that have played with the likes of so many different folks, but still stands out on their own. And we really appreciate you joining us and really talking about music. And
Yeah.
we're glad to enjoy the show tonight. And thank you again for coming.
Yeah.
Please come on back
Okay, Joe.
anytime.
All right, yeah.
Thank you again.
Thanks for your support.
Thank you so much.
Thanks for the Yamaha pianos. And,
Yes.
thanks for your interest, and good luck, man.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you guys here at
All right.
Fox Music House, because we are where the music is.